Hi, welcome along to another episode of the Sports 2000 podcast. I'm Sue Stockdale, your host for this series that takes you behind the scenes of this British sports car prototype series, giving drivers the chance to compete at some of the UK and Europe's finest circuits every year. Can I just start by saying thank you to those who've been telling us that they're really enjoying the series. And if you haven't yet given us your feedback or left a review, please take a minute to do this. You can go right on over to the podcast page on the Sports 2000 website and you'll find a link there. It won't even take you as long as driving around one lap of Brands Hatch. It's really easy. Now my guest today is one of the newer drivers on the Sports 2000 grid this year, Grant Gibson. He's been driving a Van Diemen RF94 in the Duratec category. Grant is originally from Australia and one of our international drivers who started racing at the age of 20, firstly driving a Lotus 23B that his father and brothers had modified by putting a 3.5 litre V8 engine in place of the small Lotus-Ford Twin Cam. In the early 80s he came over to the UK and got involved in the F1 scene, working for Benetton and then Williams as a mechanic for drivers including Nigel Mansell, Nelson Piquet and Keke Rosberg. Welcome to the podcast, Grant.
Thank you very much, Sue.
It's great to speak to you today, and I know that you're one of the newer competitors in the Sports 2000 grid, so I'm going to be interested to get your experiences from the newcomer's perspective about what that's like. I also know you're Australian, so it gives us lots to talk about in terms of your experience growing up and living and working there. Maybe that's where we start our conversation.
Well, we could do, as long as you don't hold being Australian against me, that's okay.
Not at all. I know you came from a large family. Tell us a bit about what that was like and what you were involved in as a child, particularly in relation to cars and motorsport.
Well, I grew up in a big family of 5 brothers and 3 sisters, and my parents run a combination of a garage, a cafe and cinemas. So I'd experience with retail and with the garages and things, built his own race cars back in the early 40s and 50s. And naturally, I grew up in amongst all that, working on the cars, my older brothers racing. That's how I basically started in it and got the love of it.
Was it a bit of competitiveness there between you and your brothers?
Oh, very much so. Initially, my the oldest brother in the family was racing, so I was quite young then. And sadly, unfortunately, in 1969, he was actually killed motor racing at Bathurst.
Oh, goodness.
In one of the big sports cars, big V8 sports car, became airborne and flipped. So and then another older brother, him and myself raced together, and we had some good clashes, racing against one another. And sometimes he'd get quite upset if I gave him a little tap and spun him off or something. So, there was a good bit of rivalry there.
I can imagine that having such a dreadful family tragedy in the world of motorsport, did that not put you off or any of the other family members from driving?
No, not really. In some ways, it made me think, well, I want to do what he did and fulfill his sort of dreams as such. He was basically at the top of his motor racing game in Australia. He was driving for Bob Jane, who was very well known over there, and big teams of race cars. And it was wanting to sort of carry on from him as well, because the Gibson family name was there in motor racing as well. Everybody knows the Gibsons in Australia. And driving and wanting to drive again, for me, was a combination of my older brother. He started initially, and then I started following as well and got hand-me-down race cars, basically. First one I drove was a Lotus 23B that the family, brothers and dad, had shoehorned a Oldsmobile V8 into it. So that was a very quick machine in a light car. And then when I was 10 years old, my dad took me to buy brother's car, which was an ex-Graham Hill 24-hour Le Mans Lotus 15, so a lovely classic race car that I basically restored and raced for a while myself. Sadly, I haven't got that car anymore. I had to sell it after marriage breakups.
And in terms of racing in Australia, what's that like compared to some of the circuits that you've probably experienced over here in the UK?
The circuits that we raced in were none that I raced on that were as interesting as some of the ones over here, like Brands Hatch and Alton Park. Little local circuit that we had only sort of 10 miles from where we lived was Winton Motor Raceway. It's about 100 miles north of Melbourne. Calder was another one, which was basically 2 straights and a couple of wiggle. Not that interesting. Phillip Island was probably the best one of the lot. I raced at Phillip Island, and that's got a lot of character, and some of the people possibly would know that one and raced on it themselves.
And with that experience that you were having in Australia, and obviously the family interest in cars and having garage, and then wondering what took you across to the UK.
Well, yeah, with my racing in Australia, I got to a point where I thought, well, to go faster or improve, I thought I'd come over to England and get involved with Formula One to put all the latest ideas and tweaks to my own racing back in Australia. The plan of coming over for a couple of years ended up being just on 10 years before I went back to Australia. I believe, I haven't checked of late, that in the Lotus 15, I still hold a lap record at one circuit, Winton, I believe, in the historic class. And that's all due to me sorting out the car a lot better than what I knew before after 10 years in Formula One.
Wow, yeah, one would hope that there was some useful learning from that you were able to put into practice, and great that you still got that lap record.
It was a steep learning curve getting into Formula One from being a club racer out in Australia.
How did you manage to get into Formula One? I guess any of the listeners to this podcast be thinking, I'd love to do that, or I'd love to help somebody else to do that. It's a pretty difficult thing. I imagine everybody wants to work in Formula One. How did you make it happen?
Well, because of my family and my father, and we had contacts, combination of Jack Brabham, Phil Irving, and I had some introductory letters when I first came over. This is early 1980 when I came over. That helped. I knocked on the door and ended up getting a job as a sub-assembler in Benetton in Whitney. Basically, I was lucky enough to have some sort of insider. These days you have to go through sort of an engineering background almost, or a course, I believe.
What did you learn from that experience in Benetton, and then I think subsequently you were in Williams, is that right?
Yes, yeah. I went from Benetton to working on the test team and the race team at Williams. I was actually ended up as the number one mechanic for Nigel Mansell. So I did that in 1986. I was the number one mechanic. But yeah, the learning curve is more about just preparation and checking and double checking and how they do things. So it was a very good learning curve, and everything is done right. And even the best is never good enough. You can always improve.
I also imagine there's a real sense of teamwork that makes Formula One teams successful. What did you learn about teamworking?
Teamworking, well, every car, especially at Williams, there were basically separate teams on each car, and you basically all work together for the common good. I can't say how I could put it. Any help that was required, somebody would dive on and help you, and just all trying to, brainstorming, trying to work out what's the best solution to make it all work.
It sounds like an amazing time working with those top drivers in the races. What were some of the highlights that you had during that experience?
Winning some of the Grand Prix, naturally, but it's so competitive and so professional. Even back in the 80s, the very first time we won one was at Brands Hatch. For all the work and effort to get there, and me being sort of fairly green out of Australia, and we won the Grand Prix. Literally milliseconds later, it was like, well, pack up, let's go home. That's history. Let's get on. The next race is on now. And I was very surprised how it was such a peak and then a drop back to, let's get back to, we're got to go back to working on next race. So it was the highs and lows of the celebration, and then, right, that's finished. Let's get on with it again.
No time to rest on one's laurels.
No.
Keep moving forwards.
No, for sure. That's what surprised me initially. We just won a Grand Prix, but it was all right. Yeah, brilliant there. Okay, that's history. Let's get on with something else now. Try and improve it for the next race.
I can imagine that's a continual focus on relentless improvement and tweaks. And
it is, yes, that's for sure.
And with your intention from that whole experience to take back the learning from Formula One and then take it to Australia and apply it to your own experience, what were the things that you took from that experience that then made you better when you were back in Australia?
Just generally how they do things, and the professionalism of double checking, analysing every literally nut and bolt, why it should be there, what's its reason to be there, can we improve it or make it easier to remove, and a combination of that and setting up a car and handling and things. I think that's where I learnt the most, is a combination of handling and how to do things properly, basically, in an engineering point.
And I can imagine that whilst you had that experience, that mindset that you'd taken from F1 back into Australia, I'm wondering whether then those around you that didn't have that experience were as keen to change or adapt
Yes, well, we always get comments. It's a bit like even now with the Sports 2000s, people comment on how lovely the car looks and generally how well it goes. It's just the driver that's a bit slow at the moment.
So you're still applying these principles that you learned in what you're doing today in Sports 2000?
Oh, very much so. Yes, I sit down and look at it, and as fast as I build it and put it back together, I look at it and go, "Wow, I could have done it differently this way or that way to make it better, lighter, whatever."
Remember, it's that time of the year again for Motorsport Days Live at Silverstone, which is on the 5th and 6th of November, a place where all the best brands, drivers and cars will be showcased. Creative Funding Solutions will be headlining, along with Sports 2000 on their stand. Creative are one of the UK's leading suppliers of business funding solutions, enabling you to purchase assets, generate cash flow and grow your business. They provide finance to people as well as businesses. They fund racing cars, trailers and motorhomes. Their flexible funding options include asset leasing, financing and refinancing. And back in episode 2 of this podcast, I spoke to their director Mike Lowe about why Creative Funding Solutions supports Sports 2000. So make sure you listen to that episode. How did you come to find out about Sports 2000? And I think you're driving a Duratec, is that right?
Yes, I am driving a Duratec, a Van Diemen Duratec. Well, because they're sports cars, and I'm interested because my family have always raced sports cars, my brothers and myself. I was interested in a low-cost sort of formula in sports cars, and the Sports 2000 popped up, and I thought, oh, that's the way to go for the bang for buck and good racing with a bit of downforce and what have you. So I jumped at the chance to go and buy a car.
And from what you imagined it would be like to what it actually is like driving your Van Diemen, is it as good as you imagined it would be? Or what are expectations in reality like?
Expectations and reality, well, probably pretty good even in that respect, because the only thing that Sports 2000 have that I didn't have in the other car, the Lotus 15 didn't have any ground effects. Our Lotus 23B with the V8 that we put in it, we ended up making an aluminium body that looked a bit like a 917 Porsche and with a wing out on the back of it, because in Australia we didn't have the cars or the money as such, so we just analysed how we can keep with the people that did have the money and the bigger cars, faster cars, how we could improve our own cars. Even the Lotus 15, we chopped a lot of the body around, the original body around, and put wider wheels on it and different things like that in the early days. So we're always just trying to improve it. But with our budget, we didn't have a brand new car to go out and buy. And with the latest ideas, we were trying to put the latest ideas on old cars.
That sounds like a very prudent way to go.
Yeah, well, we learned a lot by doing it that way. And with my background in Formula One, it helped again. Circuits have improved as well, but compared to what my late brother did, he used to hold the lap record there at Phillip Island and Winton and a couple other places in the Lotus 15. But I was like 8 or 10 seconds quicker overall, but the circuits and the tyres and everything had changed since he was racing in the late 60s.
And as you're now in Duratec, how much do you think it's down to the car and how much do you think it's down to the driver to be successful?
The driver would play a good 60% part in it, and that's where I need a lot more seat time to improve. I don't have the budget enough to be practicing all the time, general testing. But I would say, yeah, it's 60 or 70% the driver and 30% the car, unless the car's an absolute, you need to improve it. But setup is very important to make sure that everything is right. And then it's the driver understanding the car to drive it well and comfortable. Rather than being a nervous car, you've got to make sure it's not nervous, so the driver then is confident in the car to throw it into a corner.
So part of it is down to seat time to get that experience and have the level of confidence to do what needs to be done in any given racetrack at a corner.
Yeah, very much so. Seat time makes a heck of a difference. Just to being getting used to the car, the feel of the car, when it's on the limit, when it's not on the limit. It's very much the experience of driving and learning it and then making a change to the car. You can actually feel, because you've had the seat time, you know the car and what it feels like through a corner, whether it's a fast corner or a slow corner. You can know with a change of a setting that, that's improved it or that's made it worse.
Different circuits, I'm sure, then provide different challenges. What have been some of the circuits that you've enjoyed this year with the Sports 2000 Championship?
Oh, I love the Grand Prix circuit at Brands, and Alton Park I like as well. Combination of the elevation changes and the way that some of the corners are. The Brands is brilliant. Alton's brilliant. I love both of those. Snetterton I like as well, but I'm still a long way from where I'd like to be at Snetterton in respect of some of the sector times. I think if I can get some seat time and practice and just switch my brain on a bit more to be braver in a few places is what it's about.
I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunities. I understand also this year, if any of our listeners who have been competing may have experienced some of your coffee.
Yeah, I believe there's been a few. I've had a lot of comments from them, drivers and people coming up saying how nice the coffee is, and even a few saying, where can I get this coffee?
So tell me about that then. What is Kookaburra Coffee? Is that the name of your business?
Kookaburra Coffee Limited, yes, that's correct. We do mobile. We've just recently sold or walked away from some of the permanent sites we had because of COVID. We had a sort of park and ride site in Oxford, which commuters into London and into Heathrow and Gatwick. We had a train station out in the Cotswolds, and we've no longer got those, and we have a trailer that does events, that we go to different events. Mainly dog shows. In my early days, dog agility shows, my early days of doing it, I found out that it doesn't matter what the weather with a dog agility show, they're there running their dog, whether it's horizontal, rain, snow, people are still there. So it's a low pitch cost to be there rather than having paying sort of £500, £1,000 or more to go to a sort of a country fair or a music festival or something. If it's tipping down rain, literally nobody's there and you've paid the money and you've lost it. Whereas the dog shows were always, there's people there wanting a coffee, whatever the weather. So that was and has been about 70% of our event business is dog agility shows, which is a massive movement.
Yeah, I can imagine. So as a dog owner in the past, I absolutely get what you're saying about don't get between people and their pets, particularly in those agility classes and shows that they go to.
That's right.
And in terms of then, Kookaburra obviously got synonymous with Australia. Is it Australian coffee? Where do you source your coffee from?
No, it's actually Peruvian, fair trade organic. It comes, we get it roasted for us in London. I came across this coffee and it's a very nice blend that 9 out of 10 people go, oh, that's nice coffee. But you've got to extract the right way. But as long as you've got a reasonable bean, you can extract the best out of it. And that's a combination of science and art, right down to the humidity changing. You change the grind of the bean.
I can sense through what you're saying, Grant, that you're applying your scientific mind from the world of motorsport and continuous improvement into the world of selling coffee as well.
Well, that's true. It's basically from picking everything up in Formula One, as analyse everything that's going on. Coffee's the same. You're just trying to analyse what's going on with the coffee, and every single cup you make is actually subtly different due to the volume of the coffee, the humidity changing, so the bean is swelling or the grind is swelling due to the humidity, so that changes the flow rates, which then changes the taste of the coffee. And it's literally a couple of seconds either side, and the coffee's not very good.
So that ability to spot where things can improve, pay attention to those small details, sounds like it's part of your way of thinking these days in whatever you're doing.
It is, and it's the old saying of the devil's in the detail is very true, and that's why you finish races or you don't finish races, things like that generally. Checking and rechecking and analysing everything.
And in terms of the experience of being in the paddock with Sports 2000, all the other competitors, what's been your experience this year as a newcomer?
Yeah, they're a great bunch of guys. Yeah, well, there's a lot of camaraderie and friendship, and if any problems, they come and help out where best they can. I had a problem with my car last event at Snetterton, where I started up to warm it up. A core plug in the dry sump system had popped out because of the cold oil and things, but also in hindsight for me, it was not a sump that I'd totally assembled myself from manufacturer, and I didn't notice that the core plug, or didn't think about it, that the core plug could possibly pop out, but it did. That won't happen again.
So you've experienced people willing to help one another?
Yes, well, people came and asked if I needed any help or any assistance, needed to put the car back together or fix it before the meeting, before the race. So, yeah, the camaraderie is really good. Everybody helps one another.
That's fantastic to hear. And I hope that they may continue to get opportunities to sample your coffee at future race meetings, perhaps next season too.
Oh, I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will. We're supplying that. That's very low cost to me. I'm happy to help in respect of giving something back to the club because it is a great club.
Well, that's fantastic to know, Grant. So as we get to the end of our conversation today, I've got a couple of quick fire questions just to get your brain thinking and to give us a better sense of you.
The brain is pretty slow at this age, you know.
I'm sure you'll do fine. So if you had a choice between Bathurst or the Nürburgring, which would it be?
Bathurst or the Nürburgring? I'd say the Nürburgring.
Okay. How about cappuccino or espresso?
Espresso.
For racing, summer in Britain or summer in Australia?
For racing, summer in Britain, in Britain actually, because it gets too hot in Australia, especially these days with global warming.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Grant. It's been great to speak to you today. My final question to you, if budget was no issue, what race car would be your ideal one to drive?
Would be there's a combination of two, either Alfa Romeo 33 TT or the Porsche 917.
Well, it's been lovely to find out about your background and more about your experience in motorsport, how you brought that Formula One thinking into the paddock in what you're trying to improve within Sports 2000. I hope to see you around paddock next year, and good luck with the coffee business.
Thank you very much, Sue. I hope to meet you personally myself. Thanks a lot.
I hope that you enjoyed hearing from Grant Gibson about his reflections on driving in the Duratec category. Remember, you can get more details about the Sports 2000 Championship and all the drivers who compete in it at the Sports 2000 website. So hop on over to sports2000.co.uk. And while you're there, you can listen to plenty more podcast episodes featuring drivers, sponsors, and officials who are all part of the Sports 2000 family. In the next episode, I'll be talking to another of the newer drivers in Sports 2000, but someone who's no stranger to motorsport, and that's John Eiley, who's worked in F1 at Renault, Ferrari and McLaren, and he now runs his own business helping people's performance vehicles to go faster. I hope you can join me then.